So we will wait for a moment and I will start within 1 minute. Okay นะครับผมเริ่มเลยนะครับ Good evening everyone. Welcome to the Humanities Lecture organized by the Department of Humanities, Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, Mahidol University. This is our third lecture of this year from Assistant Professor Avishek Ray. So last 2 weeks, we already finished 2 lectures with quite the same topic. And today we're gonna shift to another topic. And the topic today is why the digital classroom is a bad model for digital learning. So before I introduce our speaker and respondent, I shall say something. As all of us would be obviously agree that we have struggled with the pandemic of coronavirus disease for almost 3 years. And the situation has forced us to adapt ourselves to use the digital tools and digital technology. We teach online, we set the meeting online, and as we call this situation with the buzzword, the new normal. And apart from the problem of the digital divide, we also have the problem of the overuse of the digital classroom. And it leads to the question that can digital classroom completely substitute for the real or the physical classroom? And around, I don't sure, a couple months ago or half years ago, we heard a lot about metaverse or virtual reality, but today it seems this thing disappear from the media. It might be because many of us already think that the virtual reality, even if it has a benefit for us in some situation, but it cannot use for the whole things of human interaction to each other. Okay, so today we have a speaker, assistant professor, Dr. Avishek Ray, and let me introduce him a bit. He is a lecturer from the Department of Humanities and Social Science, National Institute of Technology, Silchar. He is currently a visiting professor at our faculty, and he is specialized in we can say sociology and cultural studies. And now we have another important person who would be respondent. So welcome assistant professor Sovaritthon Chansaengsee from the Department of Education, Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, Mahidol University. Ajahn Sovaritthon is Ajahn Sovaritthon specialized in behavioral science and education for disabilities and special education needs. Thank you, Ajahn Sovaritthon, very much to accept to be our respondent. He will respond to what Avishek will give us a lecture. And me myself, my name is Piyanat Prathomwong, a lecturer at the Department of Humanities, Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, Mahidol University. Okay, and now let me turn microphone to Ajahn Avishek, and you can give a lecture for maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and then we will discuss together. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it's a pleasure again to be back and speaking to an audience that I almost now know fairly well. So welcome. Thank you, Ajahn Piyanat and Ajahn Sovaritthon for Piyanat for introducing me, and Ajahn Sovaritthon for agreeing to serve as the respondent. So for those of you who were here last week, so am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So yeah, so those of you who were there last week and last week, we were, I mean, if you have realized that the whole lecture series, the 3 lectures are pivoting around the questions of learning and education, and we are keeping the question of culture in the background. So that is the thread that is connecting all the 3 lectures. Also, if you have noted for the last 2 weeks, I split the lecture like it was a similar topic that was split into 2 over 2 weeks, but now for 2 weeks I'm going to speak on a completely different thing, which has got to do with digital class and digital learning, of course. But then also let me tell you the thing that connects all these 3 lectures together is the pertinent question of culture or cultural difference, if you may want to call it. But before I get into the talk, I wanted to make a distinction between like digital classroom and digital learning. So let me quickly explain what I mean and how do I differentiate between these 2 concepts. So by digital classroom, I mean the platforms or the virtual venue. I mean, Ajahn Piyanat just talked about metaverse and things like that. For example, the Google Classroom that we have, or people who have used other alternative platforms like Zoom or Microsoft Team, and the way that we virtually meet our students on whatever platform. So that is basically, I consider the venue to be the digital classroom, as opposed to digital learning is more philosophically speaking. It's a phenomena in the sense that, so a quick analogy could be like the difference between a film and cinema. So I mean, a film refers to an individual text, an individual movie that you go out into the theater and watch it, or watch it on your computer, as opposed to cinema is the broader spectrum or the cultural phenomena that, I mean, for example, who watches which movies, and are you watching it with your family, with your friends? So all that kind of sociological and cultural questions included, that is what we refer to as cinema. So I mean, you could think about the digital classroom as and digital learning as an analogy to film and cinema. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is digital classroom is to learning is what film is to cinema. So that is the distinction I'm trying to make. So I mean, these are not just 2 random words that I'm using, but these are also concepts that are distinctly different. So that is point number 1 that I wanted to make. And the other point that I must signal right before I get into the talk is the fact that, I mean, 3 years back we were talking about, whether the digital classroom is good or bad, what can it do, what are the affordances that it brings to us, and those kind of questions. But 3 years down the line, as Ajahn Piyanat has correctly mentioned, the digital classroom is inevitable. I mean, it's probably impossible or improbable that in the future we'll ever go back to physical classroom in any form. It's a no return, it's a point of no return kind of thing. And henceforth now onwards, we are, even if we meet our students physically in person in class, we are very likely to use different sorts of digital techniques and tools. So those are unavoidable. So in the 3 years, what I'm suggesting is the discussion has shifted from questions like what affordances the digital classes bring to us, as opposed to the question that I'm trying to ask in the context of today's talk is, how can we sensitize the digital class, assuming that it is now inevitable, and even if we go back to the physical in-person class, it's going to utilize or make use of digital technologies in one way or the other. So the point is, given that it is now inevitable, I'm more interested in how can we make it more sensible, and how can we sensitize it for both the students and the instructors. So that is my concern, and what I'm going to speak today, I mean, begins from that kind of a concern. So with that, I'll start sharing the slides, which should be visible by now.
Yes, I can see your slides.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I'll go back and forth between, again, like some sort of a written draft and some spontaneous speaking. So as I said, the pandemic has compelled educational institutes across the world to adopt, adapt, and cope with and harness the newfound promise of the digital. I mean, there are different institutes in the world at different levels of technical and digital competence. They are trying to harness this, this newfound promise, and especially in the context of the new liberal world order, many institutes are actually using this as a cost-cutting technique. Like you record a course and then play it or webcast it, and then you do not have to recruit or hire more faculties and stuff like that. So this has become, in that sense, even in the neoliberal concept, it has become a kind of a very promising stuff, so to say. So in India in particular, this has led to the hasty and ill-planned adoption of online teaching. So in other words, I'm suggesting it was adopted very quickly. So I'm familiar with the Indian context, and as you know, like even I've been repeating this in the other talks as well. So eventually I'm using the Indian examples, but my idea is the situation is not very different elsewhere, especially in the non-Western countries, Thailand included. So this was a hasty and ill-planned adoption in most instances, without any critical dialogue whatsoever on the evolving pedagogy of digital learning. So in other words, I'm suggesting is the digital classroom is merely viewed as a instructional platform. Like instead of teaching physically, you just migrate to a digital venue like Zoom or Google Meet. But what is rather unfortunate, and I'm in the course of the next few minutes, I'm going to highlight why this is a problem. The problem is as follows: that there was no dialogue on what kind of a pedagogy does digital learning bring into being. So does it offer a new kind of learning or teaching technique? Is there a question of pedagogy already involved in this? So that's point number one. There has been no critical dialogue whatsoever on the evolving nature of digital learning, and specifically because of the fact that the discourses and the dialogues and the plannings concerning digital learning often sidestepped it was tipped in a techno utopian fantasy that deems anything digital smart. Like, I mean, that's the case in India, and as I said, that might not be very different in Thailand. Like anything that is digital is considered quote unquote smart. So you have the smart city, and you have the smart classroom, you have the smart bike, smart bicycle. So everything that uses some sort of a digital technique is referred to as smart. At least this is true in the Indian context. So anything from live streaming lectures, asynchronous teaching, integrating information and communication technology, which in the course of the lecture, I'll refer to as ICT, information and communication technology. So ICT materials to passing class notes through WhatsApp. All of these have constituted digital classroom. So this is unprecedented in the terms of the spread, what the class delivers. I mean, nowhere in history, nowhere in their immediate past, we could remember that the digital, that a classroom has so many things to offer, right? From asynchronous lectures to like live Zoom lectures to even transferring PDF files on WhatsApp. Everything is considered as a digital class. So there's no strict definition. Forget about definition. There's no boundary of the digital class, so to say. I mean, anything and everything is being considered a digital class. So in the next few minutes in the course of the talk, I'll discuss why assembling the digital involves confronting several pre-existing fault lines that cut across the questions of pedagogy, which is barely being discussed. So in India, ICT has been supplementing the physical classroom at least for the last two decades, for the last 20 years or so. I mean, especially for the well-funded government colleges and government public universities, the ICTs have been, supplementing the physical classroom. So it's nothing new in that sense. So over this period, massive open online courses, which we commonly refer to as MOOC, repositories like ePathshala, Swayam, and NPTEL. I'll quickly share this on the chat box so that, I mean, if you are interested, you could probably Google it. Sorry, did someone say something? So these are very customized Indian course repositories like course RA or the MIT course that the digital courses that MIT offers. So these are very Indianized in that sense, and I mean there are also courses in native languages, Indian languages. These are the three major big players in the industry. They have strategically been developed and curated, of course, since before the pandemic. I mean, as I'm trying to reiterate, this is nothing new. So over the last 20 years, these were very systematically being developed to an extent that they have now outgrown any major e-learning repository in the world. I mean, all these three collectively, these three all these three combined, they will just outnumber any massive course repositories like the MIT repository or course RA or something like that. So they have outgrown any major e-learning repository in the world, but they're primarily engineered as platforms meant to supplement the classroom. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest is these are not standalone, autonomous classroom materials. These are supposed to supplement the real classroom. So that's how they're designed. So with that in mind, they were designed with that in mind. So today, however, we are witnessing a shift from ICT serving as a supplement. So I highlight the expression supplement here towards it emerging as a substitute for the classroom. So these are the two words that I'm trying to draw your attention to. So what used to be supplement is becoming a substitute. So now this is the only form of learning that I mean we have used for the last 3 years, and my understanding is we are increasingly going to use it more. So I'm trying to draw your attention to this change from ICT being a supplement to a substitute. So what is at stake here is how the art of education and the art of governmentality. I'm going to talk about how this is related to the whole enterprise of governmentality in a moment. And they mutually interact within what Ajahn Piyanat just now referred to as the new normal. So there's a connection between the way, I mean, that is my proposition. Of course, you do not have to necessarily agree with me here. So that is the proposition. So I understand it's a bit provocative at this point of time. And like my provocation is that there's a connection between how digital learning platforms and courses are designed and how they map with the overall ideas of the techniques of governmentality in the neoliberal setup. Okay, so so the issue is not so much about lamenting the loss of physical classroom. I mean, I might sound very nostalgic. I mean, that's a very the left liberal kind of discourse. I mean, so that's a critique also I'm trying to make. Like I'm also acutely critical of the left liberal discourse that anything of the neoliberal order is bad and we have to go back to a pristine time in the past. So that is also not my suggestion. So I'm not trying to lament the loss, and I'm not trying to suggest that we have to go back to a time, to a pristine past where we can teach in physical classroom, because I understand that is probably implausible anymore. As I said, that digital classroom is inevitable. So the problem is not so much about lamenting as considering the pedagogic ramifications of the emerging digital classroom. So I'm more interested in considering what are the pedagogic ramifications. What does the digital classroom mean in terms of our pedagogic practices? So in fact, it is too hasty to conclude whether the digital learning now inevitable is good or bad. So again, I'm not engaging in a good or bad qualitative adjudicative kind of evaluation. So like all technologies, the digital classroom is neither neutral nor substantiative, but it poses certain ideological underpinnings. So I'm more interested in the ideological underpinnings that the digital classroom comes with. And perhaps the digital classroom as a thing in itself, and I borrow Immanuel Kant's expression here, it has no apparent value, like as opposed to, I mean, if you're considering the digital class in itself, like the class per se, it has no value as such. It is within the larger contexts of dismantling of public universities. I mean, it's a global phenomena that you know, and I'm sure that Thailand is also not an exclusion. I mean, if you think, you name any country in the world, the public universities are going massive fund crunch, and there's a increasing government intervention into the day-to-day affair of the university. So, I mean, these problems are kind of global, and it pertains to, you know, the universities across the world. So what I'm trying to suggest is the digital classroom in itself is neither good nor bad. It is within this larger context of dismantling of public universities, the globalized vision for being the kind of vision that is being set for universities under the neoliberal diktat, the whole ranking system, the whole performance-based evaluation, and so on and so forth, and the diminishing scope of dissent within if you remember the concept of imperial university. So that's a concept that I touched upon last week. So the imperial university as a model. So there's a massive, as I said, massive defunding, massive dismantling, and a kind of a global vision being set for universities across the world, and it is being replaced by what I refer to as the imperial university as the standard model last week. So we have to make sense of digital learning within this context, and only when we are able to do it, we'll understand what kind of pedagogic value or pedagogic infrastructure the digital classroom holds for us, rather than looking at digital classroom as just as a platform or just as a piece of technology. So curiously, and I mentioned this before, just a quick recap for those of you who have forgotten, the Indian Institute of Technology and the National Institute of Technology, so the kind of institute where I teach, they are purportedly techno-advanced institutes because these are technology research institutes. So the idea is they are good in using technology, and they also draw a massive amount of fund of the Indian higher education funding. So they consume more than 70% of India's higher education budget. So in other words, they are well funded compared to the average university, and they are assumed to be relatively privileged in making this switch to digital classroom. So just a personal anecdotal reference point here. So even myself being in that kind of a university, I found that there's no pedagogical dialogues being carried even in this kind of institutes, where the switch was relatively easier compared to university, because in most public universities, and if you consider a rural university, for example, outside of the major metropolitan cities, they were not equipped to make that switch, and that's where the question of digital divide came in, like who is better equipped. So in that sense, I was in a relatively well-funded institute, and it was considered that we were relatively at an advantageous position to make that kind of a switch. But it was rather unfortunate that even in this kind of universities, no one actually invoked the question of pedagogy. They just treated digital learning as a platform. So that is the poverty of imagination that I'm trying to get at. So instead, these institutes have raced to ramp up the technological infrastructure so as to better simulate the real classroom experience. So in other words, the concern was let us get a better software, let us design a better platform so that it might better simulate the real classroom. And if you now play around with your handles, even on the Zoom screen, the Zoom interface that you see on your screen, I mean, the whole gesture of clapping, raising your hand, I mean, these are simulation from, real classroom, like the whole the emoticons of clapping and raising your hand and all of that. These are simulatory devices that kind of mimic the real classroom. So the whole dialogue or whole, the whole energy was spent in designing or engineering something that would be better simulating the real classroom. So in lieu of a critical dialogue on pedagogy, one wonders, is it because institutions, bureaucrats, teachers, and learners alike are often ideologically blinded by modern India's enchantment with technology and techno-orientalist fantasy, that this kind of dialogues remain absent or they were postponed? So this is a question that I still do not have any answers to. And when I talk to my colleagues and friends elsewhere, as I'm often repeating, this situation is probably not very different from other non-Western countries, because oftentimes these societies, as in the non-Western societies, are ideologically blinded by the promise of technology. You find a new thing and you start harnessing and exploiting, and you try to imagine yourself as modern. So, I mean, the whole discourse of the non-Western societies being able to use digital classroom in a certain format, in a certain way. I mean, kind of they leverage these as a techno-futurist imagination, as a techno advanced imagination. So is it because of this that the dialogue was postponed, or is it because that the digital classroom is imagined primarily as an instruction platform for delivery, not as a pedagogical infrastructure to begin with? It has only vestigial links to pedagogy. In other words, the links are not that prominent. I mean, the digital classroom is primarily imagined as a platform to deliver certain things, to deliver certain content. So to, if you as the three e-repositories that I shared with you in the chat box. So what I'm trying to ask is, like, are these pedagogic enterprises to begin with, or are these primarily designed as delivery platforms? So you archive a course, you have a online digital course, and you use these platforms just to deliver it onto the other side of the table. So it's still unresolved. So these are the two questions that I still do not have any answers to. So on the other end of the spectrum, much of the public discussion around digital learning in India emerges from anxieties concerning the digital divide, as in the structural inequality in access to technology. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so the structural inequality in access to technology and bandwidth. So the popular discussion in the context of digital learning, they pivoted around the questions of specifically access, as in who got access and what kind of a bandwidth one has, and the urban-rural divide, the gender divide, and so on and so forth. So broadly speaking, I'm referring to all of these as digital divide as an analytic framework. The framework of the digital divide emerged as, one of the fundamental axes upon which the discussions on digital classrooms pivoted around. So one finds that the prevailing discussions constrict themselves to discussing the digital as a medium or a platform, and they rather imagine the digital class merely as a set of infrastructures, like, again, a thing in itself rather than a phenomenon. So in this scheme, the digital classroom is imagined as rendering yet another set of advanced technological affordances though without adequately conforming though adequately reconfiguring the ontological or pedagogic conditions of learning. So in other words, I'm suggesting is like the imagination, the premise of the imagination here is the digital class has got nothing to do with pedagogy as such. It's a technological device, primarily speaking, and once we are able to use it to its fullest extent, will achieve a better delivery platform. So that is the imagination. So the confident explosion of digital learning as a simulatory exercise, I call this simulatory because this is simulating the real classroom. So my primary proposition here is like we don't have any dialogue on pedagogy. We are just simulating the real classroom. So that is why I call it a simulatory exercise. So the confident explosion of digital learning as a simulatory exercise without engaging with questions of pedagogy seems to be problematic, at least on two grounds. First, implicit in this approach is a techno-futurist illusion that the digital classroom, with the aid of appropriate techno infrastructures, might as well seamlessly simulate the real classroom. So this is the idea that I said, like it's only a question of technology. The more advanced we are in terms of our technological discoveries and technological expertise, will be at one point eventually be able to very well simulate the real classroom. So that is the premise. So here the digital classroom is a simulation modeled after the real classroom, which serves as a reference. So in other words, the real classroom is a referent and the digital classroom is copying it, mimicking it, simulating it. Our model, I mean, if you think very carefully, the real classroom, as in the physical classroom, is a model that may anyway soon become obsolete. And that is the point I'm trying to make, because in the future, in the near future, we are going to use the digital technologies and digital infrastructures more often, and it is increasingly going to replace and become a substitute for the real class. So that's what, that if you remember, that's what I began with. Like it's probably impossible or improbable for all of us, even after the pandemic, to return to the pristine real classroom anymore. So put differently, the digital classroom is modeled after a model that the digital is set to push into obsolescence. So look at the fallacy here. So the digital classroom is actually trying to make the real classroom obsolete, and it is also simulating it. So it is so in other words, I mean, there's a word play here. You have to be a little bit careful. Sorry about that. So what I'm trying to suggest is the digital classroom is copying a model and at the same time trying to make it obsolete. So there's a logical fallacy here. So in other words, you are trying to make something obsolete at the same time copying it. So put differently, the digital classroom is modeled after a model that the digital itself is set to push into obsolescence. Immanent here is this techno-futurist imagination that is the paradox of temporality. The more the similitude is achieved, the more you are able to mimic it, the more the similitude is achieved, the less relevant the real classroom becomes for the next generation of learners. So the more you achieve that kind of a similitude, the less relevant the real classroom becomes. So in other words, I'll try to invoke an analogy here. The analogy being, so that is in terms of what I call the techno-orientalist fantasy, which is the whole idea of the whole idea of technological catching up. So in other words, the Western societies or the more tech advanced societies have kind of advanced in the race, and we have to we have this imagination, we have this fantasy of trying to cope up with them, and we are trying to, you know, as I said, mimic these technological infrastructures more religiously than ever before. So in a way, and this is why I call this techno-orientalist. So in a way, this is reminiscent of Orientalism, and I quote Vinay Lal here, and the quote reads as follows: Europe's past is the present of those living in India or Africa, when at long last the native arrives at the destination, it is only to discover that the European has moved on to another station, leaving only his baggage to be collected by the natives. End quote. So in other words, so you're trying to copy somebody else's past. So your present is somebody else's past. So analogously, in our case, the tech advanced cultures will now define the epistemic paradigms of digital learning. So very curiously, I mean, except for a very few exceptional instances, look at the platforms that we use. Zoom, Google, Microsoft Teams, these are all designed by Western tech companies, and we barely have any indigenous homegrown solutions. There are a couple of universities in India, like the University of Hyderabad, for example, they have a homegrown solution. I traveled to Italy. I mean, Italy, of course, is a not a non-Western country or nation, but then, I mean, just in the, for the sake of sharing the example with you, I was traveling to Italy, University of Bologna in last May. So the University of Bologna has their own indigenously grown home solution. So they have their own platforms. They do not use Zoom, Google Meet, or something that's like that. So in the irony is in the Indian context, we spend so much money on technology research institutes like ours. As I said, we consume 70% of India's higher education budget, but there has been no dialogue whatsoever on the prospect even to designing this kind of homegrown solutions. So, I mean, the problem here is, in our case, tech advanced cultures will now determine the epistemic paradigms of digital learning for the tech deficit cultures like us. I mean, quote unquote tech deficit cultures, the way they are imagined. What is past for the techno advanced cultures will then become present for the techno-deficit cultures. So in the process, pedagogic cultures and values that do not fit the modular techno-futurist images of digital learning will be depleted. For example, in India's case, look at the pluralities of language. I mean, they are never accounted for in the way that we are doing our digital classes, and in the process, especially people, most students actually, most of my students, for example, who I teach, from the vernacular medium background have difficulties in making this shift. I mean, not because they're technologically challenged, not because of the digital divide emerging from the questions of digital divide, but for example, language. So imagining the digital classroom atemporally and aculturally, I call this atemporal and acultural because you don't take into the consideration the nuances of space and time, because the whole idea is that one size will fit all. So you have a major player, major industry player designing something and rolling out to, you know, educational institutes globally. So imagining the digital classroom atemporally, aculturally from the infrastructure point of view thus signals a tryst with techno-orientalism, or orientalism to be precise, in its new avatar. So this is problem number one. Problem number two, let us pause here and go back to 2002, when the Maastricht Declaration, it's a like a legislative intervention in the Netherlands back in 2002. They adopted something what they call the global education policy in 2002 and urged all the European states to design and implement their national curriculums in sync with what they call the global education initiative. Although envisaged for upskilling, I mean, their intent was not bad. They wanted to upskill, I mean, the whole the Horizon program, the EU mission, and all of that. They tried to fit into this model, and although envisaged for upskilling the future generation of learners toward becoming global citizens, this initiative has been critiqued, massively critiqued in recent times as a universalistic approach, technocratic pedagogical endeavor, which has reversed national interests and depleted the local histories, cultures, political and moral economies of those places where it was adopted in the last two decades. So there have been studies, and I'm not going into the details. There are massive critics and major studies been furnished along those lines, how this policy, though it was not designed with an ill intent, it kind of eventually depleted the local moral economies and the political infrastructures of wherever they were adopted. So this is the kind of anxiety that I have. So in parallel, there is a concern that the digital classroom posits a similar ethnocentric framework, which is global by design, and thus will deplete the discursive pluralities of local pedagogic contexts in Asia or in Africa, immensely pluralistic societies, but purportedly tech deficit societies. So these are culturally pluralistic, but typically imagined as techno-deficit societies, and they are increasingly being engineered to fit the global imagination of development. So my anxiety is the local cultural models will be increasingly depleted the way that the digital classroom is being imagined here. So I'm toward the end probably, and I'll probably go to my last point, which is point number 3. That is the problem number 3. So likewise, the digital classroom, and by extension, the futuristic university, where I quote Rohan D'Souza here. So Rohan D'Souza, he teaches in Kyoto University, Japan, and he published this very interesting piece where I take the point where I mentioned, when I began the lecture, I said that I'll establish the connection between digital class and the governmentality right at the end. So that is precisely what I'm doing now. And I draw my propositions from D'Souza's article, which was published right actually at the beginning of the pandemic, 2020, sorry. During the very early phase of the pandemic, where he kind of teased out the connection between how the digital class is being imagined and its ramifications for techniques of governmentality. So Ron D'Souza's article, for those of you who are not familiar, it begins with, so it begins with the observation. I mean, it's just a fact, but then it has serious ramifications for how the digital classroom is being imagined. That's a point that I've been trying to stress. So he begins with the observation that, I mean, those of you who are familiar, that the Indian government has launched the Digital India program and Make in India program. So, I mean, with the current political regime, they're trying to, put a lot of thrust on the questions of indigeneity. And I mean, these are also implications for Thailand and the India-Thai relationship, because they're trying to actually build a very massive road passing through Myanmar to Thailand. So they're calling this like the Look East or Act East policy. So this road will actually go to Thailand. So hopefully one day I wouldn't need to fly. Maybe I'll take the road through Burma to Thailand someday in the future. So there's this massive thrust on indigeneity and connecting these Asian players in this regard. So Rohan D'Souza begins his article saying, look, like, although there's a massive thrust on indigeneity and there's a lot of thrust on local indigenous startups and so on and so forth, like almost half of these startups are actually funded by some Japanese bank. I forget the name of it. I don't have the article handy with me, but this is a very interesting observation. And he says, look at the contradiction here. The Indian government is trying to showcase all of these as typically Indian or typically indigenous, but most of them are actually funded by Japan. So he begins with this observation that how this rhetoric of indigeneity are actually in most instances a kind of eyewash, and it has rather they're politically motivated rather than they actually mean what they intend. I mean, they intend to do something very different than what they mean at the level of the rhetoric. So this is the observation he makes. And in analogy, he also talks about how digital classrooms are actually being funded by major corporates and giant electronic conglomerates like Google and Microsoft and so on and so forth. So he kind of, what he does, Rohan D'Souza, in his article, he talks about the finance or the economic side of it. So what does it mean when all of us, for example, you in Thailand and me in India, all of us at one go start to use tools and engineering platforms developed by Microsoft and Google. So what happens in terms of pedagogy? So this is a very simple and very basic question that D'Souza asked. And he says that the futuristic university where algorithms replaced, and I quote here, where algorithms replace the teacher's professional judgment with what he calls learnification, make instructing, not necessarily teaching learning, codifiable, seamless, and less variegated, and thus the technique of governmentality easier. So that is his point. So, end quote, the intent to codify pedagogy. So you codify everything. So with one click on the Google Classroom, you could retrieve the scores of 500 of your students. You could probably retrieve the learning pattern of the entire class that you taught. So this is what D'Souza refers to as codification. So you could, so in a very performance-based setup, like everything could be achieved with one click. So this is what Rohan D'Souza calls the element of codifiability. So the intent to codify pedagogy in India, and this is an analogy that like I'm trying to propose here, it must be noted, it has curious origins in the Orientalist project, whereby Hindu law and grammar were sought to be codified towards streamlining governmentality. If you remember my first lecture, as in 2 weeks back, with the primary ideas of university, where I spoke about ideas of university, I was talking about this guy called Macaulay. So he introduced the English as a language of instruction and all of that. And the idea being, if you remember, I shared with you one quote by Macaulay. He said that we cannot, it is impossible to transfer the English officers across the ocean to India to rule and govern, because it's not cost effective. So we'll create a bunch of people who will be Indian in blood and color, but they will be able to, we replicate our taste and understand our intent of governmentality, and they'll bridge these gap between the colonizer and the colonized. So that was the whole intent of why he said that English should be the language of instruction. So this is a very Macaulayan move in that sense. And if you remember that, so we see a very similar kind of move here today. So the digital classroom under the platform capitalist regime is being configured as a site where the art of education forges links with that of governmentality. We perforce have to consider here what kind of classrooms are going to have to be then exist to realize such a vision, as in this global vision, as in this one size fits all approach, and what kind of infrastructures are going to have to exist for that to be possible. So the nuances in the osmosis between pedagogy and governmentality have been occluded by the inevitability with which the digital classroom has unfolded itself. In the digital classroom, the student is, and I quote D'Souza here, increasingly being imagined as an user. So the student is not being imagined as a student or a learner anymore. The student is a user, simultaneously a virtual learner and a raw material for data harvesting, end quote. And the algorithm user interaction becomes analogous to the teacher-student relation. So what was the relation between the teacher-student now becomes the interaction of the algorithm and the user. So besides its functionalist role, the university metaphorically is a microcosm of the universe. So if you etymologically think the university is called university because it is, imagined as a metonym of the universe. So it's the universe writ small. So that is why the university is called university, because it's a small universe. So I'll stop here by asking what happens to this moral universe, what happens to this plural universe when pedagogy is deemed codifiable and increasingly being depluralized. So in this connection, Rohan D'Souza, I'll end with this quote from D'Souza's article. He's saying an individual's learning curve, emotional states, psychological dispositions, and learning abilities, for example, could be all minutely mapped and tracked through the trail of data exhaust. Every digital intent in the form of a like button, emoji use, a Google quiz, a survey, or even a simple click could be graphed to size up as a behavioral analysis that in turn could be conveyed to a score to a potential employer or the university authority. So these could be all mapped, and as you can imagine, this could be all codified with a simple click. The anxiety here is once I mean we are not even close. We have basically achieved this. I mean, the way we are teaching a Zoom class or a Google class, we could probably even, I mean, I'm not a very tech savvy person. Even I have achieved this. Even when I teach a Google class, I could achieve this with a few clicks. So imagine people on the other side of the table, what Google and Microsoft does. I mean, for example, when we started our digital classes, I mean, there hasn't been any dialogue whatsoever, like the massive amount of lecture repositories that we have. What are we going to do with those lectures? What are we going to do with the data trails that it has generated over the last 3 years? I mean, there's no clarity on this. No university ever has any answers to this. Forget about Google or Microsoft. They do not have any answers to this. So what I'm trying to ask then is like so what I'm trying to suggest is this is a new imagination of the university as opposed to a plural universe. This is being imagined as a very codifiable space, which is increasingly being depluralized. So I'll stop here. So I think last part was a bit cynical or a bit, very cynical in that sense. But I'll appreciate it if you share your doubts and questions. Thank you for your patience. I'll stop sharing the slides. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Avishek, for your wonderful talk. And now I think I would have a little bit of short conclusion. If I understand you wrongly, please correct me. Or Avishek obviously said that he doesn't try to evaluate whether it is good or bad in itself to use the digital classroom. And in India, in Indian context, he said that previously, before this COVID-19 situation, they used the ICT as only supplement, and now it has shifted to the ICT as substitution. It is kind of something that is inevitable. And it's really interesting, Avishek also saying that the digital classroom system deliver only information and content and try to do a classroom simulation, but it ignores or postpones the pedagogical dialogue. And Avishek try to propose that digital classroom fails to mimic or copy the real classroom. And it is really interesting for me to know from his talk that on one hand, the digital classroom try to obsolete the real classroom, right? But at the same time, on the other hand, it also copies and mimics the real classroom. This is kind of, I don't know what to call it, paradox or irony.
It's a loop. It's a logical fallacy. It copies and it also makes it obsolete.
Yeah. Okay, and that is really interesting for me. And for the later part, I think I missed some point because it's touched on the specific on Indian context and some things, but I am very interesting to see the osmosis between pedagogy and governmentality. And when the system capitalism and this imperial university try to transform the student and teacher into the user, and this digital surveillance system try to subject us as a human being to be, I don't know, something to serve the, this is my opinion. Sorry, I put my opinion a little bit. It subject human beings try to serve the, economic or industrial system as a purpose of neoliberalism. Okay, now I would invite Ajahn Sovaritthon to respond to what Avishek just have said. Please, Ajahn Sovaritthon.
Hello, sorry, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, because the connection is gone, interrupted by something else, right? Okay, so as the topic of the bad model for digital learning, okay, actually is I agree about like no dialogue for PDAC sleep out of the topic. Please okay, remind me. Okay. Hello. Can you hear me right? Hello.
Now yes, Ajahn Sovaritthon, please begin start your talk again, please.
Okay. For the pedagogy. Actually for hello. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, because here, yeah. As you know, in Thailand also, because are without any warning of pandemic. Okay, so Thai school also like a lot of Thai teachers had to start their something that they never get used to, that like using technology. Okay, so that's mean without any consideration about most about pedagogies, they have to like prepare themselves immediately for the new semester with our physical classroom. So the point is that without this one, even our school provided some infrastructure for teachers, but not just only the teachers, okay? Not just only the preparation for about the technology, but also still the teachers, the way the teachers understand how to use they have to learn new things at the time, and also try to find the way, try to improve themselves. However, actually they are like a synchronous and asynchronous classroom. Okay, but actually learning with learning online, there are some like a challenging point. Okay, like the first one, even some school provide, or like the government, or even like the educational sector, like a private sector, try to invent our new technology. But you know, there is still inequality. For example, some school or some part try to provide them with VR classroom, or even AR classroom, okay, augmented reality, but they cannot use for the why, because okay, I went to the, like, this is not the rural area, but just only the suburban area. Okay, there I think that's around 30 to 50% of students do not have first, do not have internet connection, do not have devices for learning. I think that this one this might be about the issue that school cannot fix at that time. Okay, and the next one is about the assessment. You know, because of the model of digital learning, but in assessment, you know, there are a lot of students reported cheating. Okay, they cheated in various subjects, and some teachers try to find a new strategies to prevent this point or to fix this point. the solution is just only try to use the speed test, but the speed test is not fit anyone. So that means we don't talk much about how to teach, okay? But we just put something or push everything to be like a responsibility for the teachers. Yes, that is the point that I want to respond. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ajahn Avishek, would you like to say something on what?
Just quickly, I like your last point, Ajahn Sovaritthon. I like the way you said that we were never instructed how to, how to deal with it. There was no question of how as such. I mean, the how question was totally obscured, and we all talked about, like, as I said, like in the kind of the institute where I am, like anything from asynchronous lectures to live streaming to sending, transferring PDF files on WhatsApp, like everything was digital class. I mean, no one ever knew what a digital class is. And 3 years back, and even after 3 years, I don't think we have any clear idea of where the digital class starts and where it ends. I mean, there's no clear boundary, and we have no. I mean, we have probably in the last 3 years we have probably have some expertise on how to handle the tools and techniques, but we do not still have any discussions on the pedagogical aspect of it.
Ajahn Sovaritthon, what do you think in Thailand? Does the digital classroom system ignores the pedagogical dialogue?
Yes. Because mostly the school focuses on just only the technology about the system. But okay, even they try to improve the way to convey the message. But actually the problem is not just only the teachers, but for the student, that because some students actually at first some of them do not have iPad or even smartphone. Okay, the good smartphone, and then after that, this must be the policy during pandemic, right? Okay, other school allow their parents, okay, even in like even wardrobe school, they also need to use the devices, okay. Even wardrobe school or even like other alternative school, they have to use and turn into like a digital world. So when students with the low immunities, they have the gadgets, right? And they use the gadget in another way. Okay, their lack of digital literacy. I'm not lack. I think that's because once they never have iPad, but the school allow them to buy. Okay, when they have iPad, actually the focus is not on the lesson. This must be the problem.
Yeah, so many distraction comes with technology and social media, games, many things, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, I think we can discuss together I would open the floor to all of us in the room. And of course, includes Ajahn Sovaritthon also. So anyone want to share some ideas with us? And Ajahn Sovaritthon, you still can respond to anyone. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So anyone want to share something or? Okay, I have seen Ajahn Pakorn leave some message at the chat box. Ajahn Avishek, okay, I can read it. Digital classroom seems to give students a lot of chance to resist the instructors, especially when the classroom are big. When their cameras are turned off, the instructors seem to lose control. Yes.
True.
Ajahn Avishek, would you like to share some thoughts about this?
not much. I mean, it's true though. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, these are still difficulties that we are trying to make sense of. But then, yeah, this is partly true.
Mm. Okay, so may I put some thoughts here? I was thinking about psychological and the cognitive ability of human being. Since these days technology advanced really fast, and as we as a human being, we are evolved by our evolutionary or structure. Really, we use a long time to adapt ourselves to environment, but at the same time, technology advanced very fast. So our evolution cannot catch up or follow this the whole new things. I think this one thing I want to share now. And another thing is that I think naturally human learn by lived experience, embodied understanding. I mean, embodied experience. You have to show up your physical body to understand each other. I can bet now we talk to each other right now. I can have my gesture, something like this, but it seems something social cognition is loose in between this kind of thing. I think many cognitive scientists try to argue about this embodiment of human experience to learn something and to develop his cognitive abilities. Okay, there's no question. I just put some thoughts. Anyone want to share something? Yeah, Ajapakon said that the digital classroom is not very good tool for governmentality.
Yes, okay. I would like to share something. Actually, for classroom, not just the pedagogies, but as you said about the psychological trait, or yeah, or something like this. I think that students with learning style, okay, because in physical classroom with a large number of students, we cannot focus on okay, who want to be like this, but for online is worse. Okay, so if actually for the way the teacher teach, if they um, if they if they if they work hard, they can okay, they can track, okay, like because okay, in education, learning style in cognitive way, there are two type of that. Only these are theories, okay, field independence and field dependence, okay. The students have two way of learnings, okay, and actually if they have the self-control and self-management, if the teacher, actually there are a lot of variables that should be concerned, like we have to find the way or motivate them to have like a self-management skills, as well as because today they learn in physical school for the social cognition, they can improve that in physical school, but during online, the perception, for example, the perception on punishment is quite weird. Okay, they still think that okay, teacher cannot punish them, and for the score they can cheat. Okay, even like in student in higher education. So that's mean we have to find a way, because in the future we cannot refuse that we will get back 100% in the normal or physical classroom, because as today I observe and I survey other students, I ask them, I think that 60% of students still like to study online. Okay, they want to come to school or university, but not for learning, but for social, yes, for social aspect. So that's mean now this is the time for us to find the way to not just only the training the teachers, but find a way to like a research to find some related variables to improve either like a teacher, student, or any other stakeholders altogether. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ajahn Sovaritthon, and Ajahn Avishek saying that is it when we do this digital classroom and we are being trapped with the digital surveillance, that is another thing I think is very interesting. Imagine about a smart classroom. I think it was or it is a model in China, I'm not sure. That the classroom can track student eyes or student, character, they being asleep or do they give an attention, a fully attention, something like that, and scoring, scoring them by this data. That is very what Foucault and originally by Jeremy Bentham said, what is called the synoptical, something like that. Sorry, I forget the word.
Panopticon.
Yeah. It seems we are
but
being.
This model sounds very Chinese. It's very Chinese sounding.
Okay. So anyone want to share something more or ask some question or bring some?
Yeah, I just
please.
I may propose like not a question, but I'm trying to understand some of the disadvantages as well as advantages of this virtual classroom, because you know that I've been teaching for like a couple of years now on digital platform. There are some advantages like being you have this like for example, now I saw a report that when people are connected now, we are in some way we are trying to preserve our environment, because the fact that we are restricted in traveling, and then that means the carbon emission is relatively low, and that is contributing a factor for the preserving the environment. And also when you go in-person classroom, and then the students are supposed to mark their attendance, and then we are giving them bunch of papers to write and their index numbers. So at the digital classroom, what we are doing we are doing it electronically so that we can preserve the papers, and that is indirectly like a contributing factor to preserve environment. So I do see there are some, in that respect, some advantages. At the same time, we as a lecturer or an instructor, we face some sort of like the lack of activity. Like for example, you don't see the eye-to-eye contact with the student. So that doesn't give how the students are reacting, because we cannot ask them to open their cameras or videos all the time. So in that respect, I do see there are some disadvantages. So what I like to like sort of combination of the virtual classroom and the in-person model, like sort of hybrid model, could be a sort of working thing in the future in terms of covering all these aspects. That is my point. I think Professor Avishek may have something to add in this regard.
No, I mean, that's what I meant when I said inevitable, and I was referring to the fact that there's no probability or plausibility that we go back to the all physical class anymore. It is, I mean, whether you like it or not, it has to be hybrid anyway. It's unavoidable. I mean, that's what is it leading to? I mean, it's unavoidable.
And in terms of this preserving environmental thing, what do you think? Like, I mean, we do see that there are reports out there that we are contributing so much for the environment, because now the people are like the population is growing tremendously. At the same time, like developing this kind of model in the future, I mean, it might have some like positive outcome in terms of preserving environment. How do you see that in that as an advantage?
Yeah, of course you're correct. And if you remember, there were so many reports during the lockdowns of improvement of air quality index in so many places, including in many cities in India, where the quality of air just radically improved, and especially in the foothills of the mountains, especially the kind of place where I am in. I mean, the mountains that were not visible for the last 40 years or so, for the first time, it was visible, and like we could see mountains from here because of the improvement of air quality. I mean, it goes without saying, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ajahn Sovaritthon, would you like to share something about this environmental benefits or
Environmental benefit from
digital digital use tools? I mean, we reduce to use
ah,
paper or
okay, yes, for environmental, yeah, sure. But okay, actually, yes, because we don't use paper, and I think that paperless society. However, we still have some uh some waste at home. Okay, like waste from food. Okay, um, yeah. However, for actually, I think that this one is a point for most people. Okay, actually, in the past, we just a small group of people try to invent or have innovative idea. But after pandemic, I think during the pandemic and until today, not just only teachers, but like educator and any other entrepreneur are trying to find a way, even like a student or student this is like a starting point for them to innovate something. Yes, yeah, to for their living. I saw my student make some pillow. It's like a cushion, to cushion their to cushion their back during learning online or something like this. They try to adjust by being more innovative. Yes.
it's very interesting. And I have this something to share as well. The last week, so this semester we started to teach on site at the physical room, right? And even if I teach in the physical room, I do not use paper anymore as the couple years ago. I still ask students to use mobile phone to log in Google Classroom and give the answer to the platform. So it may help environment a little bit. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. So anyone have something more to share? Or otherwise, Ajahn Avishek, would you like to put something more on political issues on this, digital sovereigns on the human
I mean, I
being?
don't have
Yeah.
much to add, but maybe one last note that which was probably I was speaking at the very end, and probably I was not very articulate, so maybe I can drive that point home. The whole point of this no clarity on the data use, and I think the response that I just made to Ajahn Pagod, in whatever we are doing by using, I mean, whenever we sit before our computer, we are generating data trail, and then there's no clarity on how this data is being used. I mean, so that is a primary concern that some people had during the initial days of the digital class. And there were cases, at least in India, and I'm not sure if not elsewhere, there were like recordings of the lectures that were repurposed and used for malicious intentions, especially places where you have very authoritative governments. Like it happened in India with a guy who spoke something against the government without quite realizing that he was like being recorded, and then a bunch of students then used the records, to draw the university's attention, and the whole mess that erupted from there. And also, contrarily, there was also this case at a place where some what do you call, like some gender insensitive comment a teacher made in a class, and then she was also put to scrutiny. So I mean, in that sense it was good. So again, like my concern is not about whether this is good or bad. I mean think of any piece of technology, it is both good and bad. So that question is cliched. So I mean it's very old hackneyed question. I'm not interested in that kind of a question. I think the pertinent question, or the more interesting question, would be can we have more clarity on how we are using the data, how we are supposed to use the data? Was it what is an ethical way of using the data? I think we need more discussions along those lines. So the kind of, I mean, what are we supposed to do with the recording? So whatever data, even the data trail that we cannot see, like what kind of license, what kind of permissions that we knowingly or unknowingly we are giving to, for example, Zoom when we are doing this meet. Like what kind of permission that we knowingly or unknowingly have already given to Zoom? How is Zoom using that? I mean, these are, I think, more pressing concerns and more, important conversations that we need to have.
Yes. Totally agree. It is really important. And my teaching might be recorded. And
yeah, I mean,
this record owned by university, not by me.
No, I understand, but then the university, I mean, I'm not sure about Mahidol. Our university doesn't have any clarity how long they're going to preserve, to what extent are they going to use it. What if there's if a student has some grievances or complaints, like is it a legal document? Can it be used as a legal document? Like there's no clarity. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And it as both as instructors and students, I'm not talking on behalf of the teachers alone, and also for the students, we are in a sense some sort of a precarious situation because we do not have any clarity. And the employer or the corporation or our employer, whosoever, can use the data in whatever possible way.
Okay. And now the last 5 minutes left. Ajahn Sovaritthon, would you like to give some final remark? Ajahn So, would you like to say something?
Actually, okay. Actually, about this one, okay, I have for the point, the model of digital classroom. I think that in the future, I think it must be improved, and now it's in the consideration of most educator and stakeholders of education. I think, yeah. I just thank you.
Okay, I think that would be complete for today, and I have to give a big thanks to Ajahn Avishek and as well as Ajahn Sovaritthon to be our respondent, and Ajahn Avishek, our main speaker. Today we have discussed many things, and I would like to say that in the next week we have another what we call mini workshop. This is the last event we organize on the 31st August, Wednesday. We're gonna have a mini workshop on the topic humanities research after the digital turn. So Ajahn Avishek would be talking about humanities research in general, and after the digital turn, what would digital humanities as a methodology of research, what we should understand this new turn. Okay, for today, I would like to say thank you for everyone to join the meeting, and please fill the evaluation form that our teams post on the chat box. And Okay, I think it's time to say goodbye for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
See you next week.
See you next week ขอบคุณมากครับอาจารย์โสครับขอบคุณมากครับสาธุทุกคนสวัสดีครับโอเคนะบ๊ายบาย